You have to go back to 1899 to find a team that had more losses than the 2024 Chicago White Sox. Less than a year after the Spanish-American War ended, the Cleveland Spiders finished off a 154-game season with a record of 20-134. The modern record, however, was held by the 1962 Mets with a mark of 120 losses, a record that would stand for over 60 years before the White Sox broke it this year with a mark of 121. Here's a graph where each dot represents a team's season for every year since 1900. There are 2,684 dots here, which means there are 2,684 different team seasons here. And they all lost less games than this one, all the way up here. This dot represents the 2024 Chicago White Sox, who outdid 124 years worth of teams losing. The team was bad in every aspect of the game, from the offense to the pitching to the defense to the base running, which is pretty obvious considering the record that they ended up with. Now, there have been a lot of videos talking about the 2024 Chicago White Sox that describe exactly that, how this team was historically bad, but I think the lone positive to come out of this year is historically bad teams statistically are almost just as interesting as historically good teams, just maybe in a less positive twist. This graph is just one of the many ways that show how bad this team truly was. By the way, only 3% of you watching this are subscribed, so if you enjoy the video, it'll help me out a lot. It's completely free, and you can always unsubscribe at any time. To show just how far behind the White Sox were from the rest of the league this year, take a look at this graph that shows the wins for every team in 2024. You can see the gradual decline from the top that continues all the way down until you hit the White Sox. Then it suddenly drops. The color of the bars is representative of how many games the team won. The more games the team wins, the greener the bar is, and the teams that won less games are more intensely red. As you can see, the White Sox are a very deep red color, while no other team seems to be nearly as close. That is, of course, because of the giant gap between the White Sox and the rest of the league. The color mapping reserves all of the medium shades of red for teams that would fall between the White Sox and Rockies, but, of course, there are no teams there, so the colors aren't present. This is a graph of all of the worst losing streaks across Major League Baseball in 2024. Take a guess which ones belong to the White Sox. This one, this one, this one, this one, and of course, this one. They're in possession of not just the longest losing streak in the league, they have the 3 longest losing streaks in 2024. One lasted 12 games, another lasted 14 games, and the worst one lasted 21 games. That's 47 games altogether between these 3 streaks. There were only 4 streaks to reach double digits, and the White Sox had 3 of them. The Pirates had the other one, which lasted exactly 10 games. Not to mention, the White Sox appeared 2 other times on this graph. On the other side of things, the White Sox longest win streak was only 4 games, which took place between May 8th and May 11th. When you look at their performance every month, you can see that they struggled for a big portion of the year. They recorded only 3 wins in July and only 4 in August. Their most winningest month was May, when they won 10 out of their 27 games played. Just how does it get this bad? Let's start pretty basic. Baseball is ultimately a game where you try to score more runs than your opponent. You can accomplish that goal in 2 different ways: score runs on offense or prevent runs with pitching and defense. Here's a graph of all 30 teams and how well they fared in both of those categories. Where are the White Sox, you might ask? They're all the way down here, with by far the least amount of runs scored and the 3rd worst runs allowed, behind only the Marlins and Rockies, who, of course, play in Coors Field. To take a deeper dive, we can look at 2 much better stats at evaluating run production and prevention, and that's WRC plus and ERA plus. These stats take into account the environment that the teams play in and normalize their production to the league average. They are the worst team in the league when it comes to WRC plus and the 2nd worst when it comes to ERA plus, only ahead of the Colorado Rockies. Historically, the season also looks pretty bad, with them finishing right here amongst the other 2,684 different seasons since 1900. For a team to be this bad in 2024 is kind of insane. When it comes to the 2 main aspects of the sport, hitting and pitching, they clearly do not perform well compared to the rest of the league. This might not be a completely fair assessment though, as the White Sox might not have the stars that the other teams have, and they don't have as much money invested into the team, so therefore they're not going to be as good as them. This plot takes that into account by looking at the relationship between the team's 2024 payroll and their winning percentage. You got teams like the Yankees and Mets over here who spent a lot of money and won a lot of games, and you have teams like the Guardians, Orioles, and Brewers who didn't spend a lot of money but still won a similar amount of games. Then you have your A's, Marlins, and Nationals as the bad, smaller market teams. The White Sox, of course, are not here, and you might be noticing this suspicious-looking void once again at the bottom of the graph. As you might expect, the White Sox are all the way down here. They have a higher payroll than 12 teams in the majors, over double what the A's spent on their players, yet they still had this historically awful year. The gap between the White Sox, the worst team, and the Rockies, the second worst team, is the same size between the Rockies and the Boston Red Sox, who finished the year right at 500. So obviously, money was not the problem. Their two highest paid players were Yoan Moncada and Andrew Benintendi. Moncada made about $25 million in 2024, and Benintendi made around $17 million. These two players combined for 0.0 F4. If you're unfamiliar with the term WAR, it stands for wins above replacement, or how much better a player was than a replacement level player. Zero WAR means that these two players were just as valuable as what two replacement level players would have been who you could have found for less than $2 million combined. Now, Moncada was injured for the bulk of 2024, but judging off past performance, he probably wouldn't have led the White Sox to many more wins. Andrew Benintendi actually holds the title for the highest paid White Sox ever with his 5-year $75 million contract. Since he signed that contract before the 2023 season, he's been worth negative 0.7 F4, meaning he's been worse than a replacement level player, and he's still under contract for 3 years owed $45 million. This, as you might imagine, is not a good sign for the team, and is one of the biggest reasons why they were able to be this bad. And this obviously raises concerns about the owner and the front office that's building this team. The owner of the White Sox, Jerry Reinsdorf, is far from a saint in the city of Chicago. For the reasons that I've already mentioned, and some that we'll get into later, most fans don't have the best feelings for him. WAR and the 2024 White Sox are two things that go hand in hand. That is, WAR does a very good job at depicting just how bad of a season it was for this team. Here's a graph of position player F4 across the league for each team in 2024. As you can see, you got your bad teams at the bottom with the Rockies, Angels, Marlins, and Pirates. Then you got your better teams up top with the Dodgers, Yankees, and Diamondbacks, or at least the teams that have good position players. Now, once again, you might be wondering, why does the graph extend into the negatives? There's no way that a whole team can be worth negative WAR over a full season, right? Why is that even included on this graph? Well, with the 2024 White Sox, anything is possible as they find themselves well below the zero mark with a value of negative 6.3. This is actually the fourth worst value that's ever been recorded in the modern era since 1900, with the three worst teams being the 1920 A's, the 1979 A's, and the 1977 Braves. So a bar this low has not been hit since Jimmy Carter was president, and as you might know, Jimmy Carter is no spring chicken. The White Sox had only 6 position players who recorded a positive F4. Yes, only 6 the entire year. Paul DeYoung, who was traded at the deadline, was worth 1.0. Nicky Lopez was worth 0.9. Luis Robert was worth 0.5. Tommy Pham, who was also traded, was worth 0.2. And Lenyn Sosa and Brooks Baldwin were both worth 0.1 WAR each. 2 of their most valuable players in 2024 didn't even get to play the full season with the team. They were traded at the trade deadline. They had 15 different players record a negative WAR, which led the league, of course. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see the list here. The White Sox as a whole had a WRC plus of 75, by far the worst in the league. WRC plus is an all-encompassing offensive statistic where 100 is set to be league average and every point above or below is a percentage point above or below the average. This means that the White Sox were 25% worse than the league average team in 2024 when it comes to producing runs. To put this in perspective, you have to go back to the 2004 Diamondbacks to get a team that had a lower WRC plus when they put up 74. WAR just doesn't cover offense though. It also covers the little things, defense and base running. As you might expect, the White Sox did not excel in that area either. Defensively, they recorded negative 89 defensive runs saved, which is dead last by a large margin. Now, admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of defensive runs saved as a statistic, which I'll get into in another video, but don't worry, we can look at other metrics. My favorite defensive metric is fielding run value, as it uses StatCast positional data to determine how efficient defenses are at converting balls in play to outs. It also takes into account things like catcher framing and blocking. By far, the worst team in fielding run value is the Chicago White Sox, unsurprisingly. They have negative 57. You can interpret this as their defense allowing 57 more runners to score than what an average defense would have. That's not only the worst mark in 2024, it's the worst mark that's ever been recorded since the stats started being tracked in 2016. This plot shows all the teams' fielding run value and base running runs above average. As you can see, the White Sox are at the bottom, meaning they're the worst in fielding run value. They're also pretty bad at base running. They have the 7th worst according to base running runs above average. Compared to the other numbers that we've been through, that doesn't sound that bad, but it's still well below average. They can't even do the little things right. Teams like the Brewers, Royals, Tigers, and Guardians were some of the best teams when it comes to defense and base running, and there's no coincidence why they were some of the most surprising teams in 2024. Defense and base running are a lot more valuable than people think. This group of position players that the White Sox fielded in 2024 is among the worst that we've seen in a long time. But we've only talked about half the roster. 13 of the 26 players on the roster at a time are position players. The other half are the pitchers, so I think it's about time that we look at them. When we look at the F-WAR for pitchers, there's no ominous void, there are no negative numbers present here. That's because the White Sox are right here, not in last. Although it's not something to get too excited about, as they still find themselves well below average with only 9.8 F-WAR. The White Sox pitching staff actually wasn't awful. They had 4 pitchers actually eclipse the 1 WAR mark in the positive direction. That was of course led by Garrett Crochet, who put up 4.7 F-WAR despite pitching just 146 innings. Eric Fedde, who was traded at the deadline, accrued 2.6, Chris Flexen recorded 1.3 WAR, and Jonathan Cannon had 1.1 WAR. Garrett Crochet offers a glimmer of hope for this team in a couple different ways. He's by far the most valuable player on the Major League roster right now after posting an insane 35% strikeout rate to a 5% walk rate in his first year as a starter. I say he's valuable in more ways than one because of the value that he could bring back in a trade. He has 2 years of control left, and the White Sox are obviously not going to be anywhere near competitive in that window, so it would be smart to trade him now while his value is at its peak. Which brings me to the final topic for the 2024 Chicago White Sox, the future, which might be more positive than you think. Despite being historically bad, the White Sox will not be rewarded with the first overall pick for next year's draft. In fact, the highest pick they can get is the 10th overall pick. To prevent tanking, Major League Baseball put in place a few rules that really hurt the White Sox this year. Since they were selected in the lottery last year at the number 5 pick, and they do not receive revenue sharing, meaning they aren't in a small market, they cannot have back-to-back years in the lottery. This is an attempt to level the playing field between the big markets and the small markets, which is a good idea in the grand scheme of things, but the White Sox are run like a small market team, which gives them a disadvantage in the draft. They don't get the same benefits that an actual small market team gets. Most of that blame falls on the owner, Jerry Reinsdorf. As we talked about earlier, he's not well liked amongst fans because of this reason. Chicago is by no means a small market, yet the team acts like one. Their largest contract in history is only $75 million, and it's held by Andrew Benintendi, someone who probably shouldn't have ever even gotten a contract like that in the first place. Moving past that though, the rest of the future for the White Sox isn't all that dim. They have 4 prospects in MLB Pipeline's top 100, a balance of 2 high-ceiling arms in Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith, with a couple of high-ceiling position players in Colson Montgomery and Edgar Caro. Their entire farm system ranks 11th according to MLB Pipeline, which puts their future in a much better place than their present. In contrast, the Angels, who also didn't have a great 2024, are ranked as the 29th best farm system, aka the second worst. For as bad as the Angels are now, their future might look even worse, which is obviously not a combination you want to have. So, believe it or not, the White Sox may not be in the worst position when it comes to the entire franchise, which is a nice positive note to end on. While the 2024 Chicago White Sox set a modern-day record for failure, their future may not be as grim as their present suggests. The combination of a solid farm system, some standout players like Garrett Crochet, and potential assets to trade gives the team hope for rebuilding. Whether the White Sox capitalize on that potential or continue to flounder remains to be seen, but one thing is for certain, 2024 will be a year fans won't soon forget, even if they'd like to. The painful reality of this historically bad season is that it exposed the deep flaws within the organization, from the ownership to the management decisions to the on-field performance. The combination of these factors has given us this gift of this outlier season. A season so bad, I just made a whole video about visualizing just how bad it actually was. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. It's completely free and it helps the channel grow. I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.